The landscape of the Scottish Highlands is defined by the lochs that give it shape and character.
Of course, most of these bodies of water are entirely natural, but some are the product of engineers. They created new lochs and enlarged others with their monumental hydro schemes.
In this series, I'm on a grand tour of Scotland's lochs, travelling to the shining jewels in our landscape. Exploring the long fjord-like sea lochs of the north and west, crossing the great freshwater lochs of the Highlands, and discovering the secrets of the many lochans that stud the open countryside. In this programme, I'll discover an almost forgotten prisoner of war camp, learn how the last of the navvies engineered what was Europe's biggest artificial loch, trek to a bothy and visit the largest freshwater beach in the country. From Loch Leven on the west coast, I'll head inland to the great artificial loch of the Blackwater Reservoir. From there, I'll cross the mountains to Loch Ossian, and finally to Loch Laggan. This narrow, fjord-like arm of the sea is Loch Leven. At its head, nestling beneath high mountains, is the village of Kinloch Leven.
Just over a century ago, there was not much here really. A couple of shooting estates on either side of the River Leven, but all that changed with the coming of electricity and the development of a vast industrial complex right here in the Highlands.
In the early 1900s, the British Aluminium Company built a huge state-of-the-art aluminium smelter in the village, using hydroelectricity from the Blackwater Reservoir, built high in the mountains. Alongside the smelter, a new town for hundreds of workers was laid out. Kinloch Leven was born, becoming the first village in the world where every home had mains electricity, earning the nickname the Electric Village. But 20 years ago, the plug was pulled on the community because Kinloch Leven couldn't compete with modern plants overseas.
It's hard to imagine, but this now empty site once produced over a third of the world's aluminium production, which was much sought after for its purity and high quality.
Today, just a few brick buildings serve as reminders of the giant industrial complex. The closure of the smelter in 2000 left a huge hole in the built fabric of the village, which was forced to reinvent itself. Capitalising on its highland location, Kinloch Leven attracts tens of thousands of outdoor enthusiasts, from climbers and walkers, downhill bikers, and those who trudge the West Highland Way.
But few people who follow the tracks and trails behind the village know of the existence of a German prisoner of war camp that dates from the First World War.
Joining me to walk to the camp is archaeologist Alan Kilpatrick.
It's pretty wooded through here, Alan.
It is, but we're actually in the campsite.
Right, already?
Yes, we are, and as I think you can see off to your left here.
Of this?
Yeah, there's a building just there.
I see it, yeah, those bricks.
Yeah, the bricks stand on a concrete plinth, and that was the chimney. And then to the left of it, you can see a series of concrete blocks.
Uh-huh.
Now, those were the foundation pillars for the suspended wooden building which sat above there.
Now, what would it have been used for?
Well, we believe it was the mess and dining room for the British Guards.
Oh, this is the British side of the
This was the
camp?
British Guards.
I see.
The Germans are down here behind me and down the bottom of the hill.
Well, let's go and have a look at that, see what we can find. Now, Alan, I don't know about you, but it's definitely time for the midge net because the wee beasties are becoming unbearable.
They are.
But where are we? I can see that we're standing on a concrete platform of some kind.
Yes, we're standing in the prisoner of war kitchen, which you
For
can
the
tell.
Germans?
Yes, and you can see it's quite a long building.
Uh-huh.
But just in front of us here, and right up to that green hill in the distance, this flat area was nothing but a series of prisoner of war huts.
Now, you've got this plan here Are these the accommodation blocks?
These are the prisoner of war blocks here. We're standing in the kitchen there. So right in front of us is where all these prisoner of war huts stood.
It's hard today to imagine that the camp ever existed, but from the air, the outline of the paths between the huts and other buildings can just be made out.
So how many men would have been accommodated here, do you think?
In these long buildings, you're looking at probably about 80 men to long
80
building.
men.
And by the time you add up all the prisoner of war huts on the site,
About 1,000?
about 1,000 men. And that's what our documents tell us. We have about 1,000 men on site.
So what were the men employed doing when they were at the camp?
It all ties down to the needs of the local aluminium smelter and water. It's hard to believe here in the Highlands of Scotland there's a shortage of water, but despite building an enormous reservoir in the Blackwater, it wasn't quite enough water. So they had to take water from another loch, just at the top, right above us here. And so that's what the Germans were employed to do, building this massive pipe across a Scottish hill.
What kind of conditions would they have experienced here? Would it have been a tough regime for them?
Well, there was a lot of physical work, but the conditions in which they were held were pretty good. For example, food. The food here, they would have got here, was the same as a British soldier would have got in active service, and that was considerably better than anything the Germans had from 1916 onwards. By the end of the war, the Germans were living, soldiers were living in almost starvation rations, very poor food indeed. The men here were sitting in relative comfort, good accommodation, warm, comfortable bed, and good food.
Cushy number, really,
Well,
in comparison.
absolutely.
And you're not being shot at.
You may be midged, you're not being shot at.
Escaping from the midges, I returned to the village, which 100 years ago earned a place in the hearts of many German prisoners of war. Close to the old steamer pier, where prisoners arrived in 1916, I meet Avril Watt, who knows more than most about the history of Kinlochleven. Avril shows me a model of one of the prison huts, made for a local exhibition about the camp.
This is actually an absolute amazing model. There's 46 bunks, and in here there's a little room, and that's where the officers stayed. But they also stayed with people.
Did they? What, as
Yeah.
lodgers?
Yes, as lodgers, and they did a lot of work in the village, like they tidied the village, they mended fences, they worked in the coalry.
Do we know if any of the prisoners managed to escape back to Germany?
There was 2 escaped down to Glencoe, and they hid in a barn, and one of the crofters found them. So he fed them, kept them warm, and he said, look, you can stay here as long as you like, but your best bet is to go back to camp or hand yourself into the police, because all you've got is mountains and snow, and you don't know how to get to Germany. So they did. They came back and handed themselves in.
After the war, the 2 escapees sent the Iron Cross medals they'd won to the crofter who'd caught them.
What do you think they meant by that, Jess?
Well, it was just a thank you that he hadn't turned them in and they hadn't been shot. I mean, nobody was shot.
A cruel fate met many prisoners at the end of the war. With peace came death and the Spanish flu pandemic of 1919.
28 of them died.
Did they really?
Yeah, 28 of them died and they were buried at Appen. So about 6 or 7 years after the war, their bodies were repatriated to Germany. But there was, that was the only deaths we had.
It's pretty unlucky though, wasn't it? To
we had
survive
no
the war
accidents or anything. Yeah,
and then
exactly.
suddenly to be taken out by a virus
I know.
unexpectedly.
I know.
Leaving the village and its wartime memories, I slog uphill for 3.5 hours, going in search of the old hydro dam. It was the reason the prisoners were sent to Kinlochleven, and the source of the electricity that powered the village and its smelter. After a long hike, the great concrete dam, holding back the mighty Blackwater Reservoir, finally comes into view. When it was finished in 1909, the 1-kilometre dam was the biggest of its kind in Europe. Thousands of men had toiled day and night to build it. I join engineer Mark Taylor to learn more about this great hydroelectric scheme.
Mark, we're standing here, we've got the Blackwater Reservoir behind us, and this monumental structure, the dam, holding it all back. Do we know much about the people who built this?
Yes, they were approximately 3,000 people working on the scheme. The majority of them were navvies, but they came from all over Scotland, the Isles, local crofters, Ireland. They walked across the mountain ranges from Glasgow to get here. And one of the requirements they had for the foremen, the gangers, was that they were bilingual so that they could communicate their instructions to all the workforce.
Bilingual in Scots and
And
Gaelic.
Gaelic, yep. There was some mechanised equipment used here, but nothing like there would be now. So it was a lot of manual labour, working with picks and shovels. They blasted rock, they drilled the holes for the explosives using bars and hammers.
Over 3,000 men lived on site during the construction of the dam. Conditions were challenging, to say the least.
There were a lot of them living up here. There were a number of workers' camps. Almost a small village was built up here. And in old photographs you can see bell tents on this side of the dam where they lived. So there was accommodation all around here, but it was very basic.
They were
very
living under
rudimentary.
canvas.
Yes.
That's amazing, isn't it? At this altitude, you're over 1,000 feet up here. And did they have a shop?
There was a store up here. They brought all the materials up by a cableway, and that was everything: food, drink.
A very important commodity.
It was a very important commodity.
Because I mean, there wouldn't be many amusements up here at the end of the day.
None at all. Well, apart from what they made themselves, I think their life revolved around working, gambling, drinking and fighting.
Really? All related.
All related, yeah.
In the shadow of the dam, enclosed by a wooden palisade fence, are neat rows of headstones. These mark the last resting place of some of those who died building the dam a century ago.
In the days before building sites were regulated, there were appalling accidents, and so many men died here that the company opened up this graveyard to bury the victims of accident and disease. And here they still lie, ironically under headstones made of concrete, the very material that in life they mixed and poured to build the dam.
Surprisingly, amongst this army of navvies were a few women. The name on one headstone reads, Mrs. Riley.
Now, we don't know anything at all about Mrs. Riley, but we do know that women were at the dam, and they were usually camp followers, the wives of the gangers and foremen who were organising the squads of men. And to make a little bit of extra money, they took in laundry and did cooking. So perhaps that's what Mrs. Riley was doing when she was up here.
Other headstones have no name at all. Such was the nature of the largely anonymous workforce. It was possible to work and lose your life without anyone knowing your name. Leaving the forlorn burial ground, I get special permission to cross the Great Dam. Entering some really remote country, I head towards Glen Eularen, the Glen of the Eagles.
You know, there's so much space out here, you almost feel lost in the landscape, tiny and insignificant. There's really not a lot out here except heather, grass, moor, and more rivers, it seems.
The land here was once owned by the British Aluminium Company. It's now managed by Jahama Highland Estates, part of an international industrial conglomerate striving to enhance its green credentials with a programme of natural forest regeneration and peatland restoration. I follow a faint track through the heather that leads to a bothy at my next destination, Loch Kieran, lying nearly 6 kilometres from the dam.
For those of you who don't know, a bothy is a shelter or a hut. The origins of the word are quite obscure, but whatever the etymology, a bothy is a welcome sight to a weary walker looking for a roof over his head. And there's one right here.
The bothy sits just above the loch. It was originally built as a shepherd's cottage about a century ago. and it replaced one that was lost to the rising waters of the Blackwater Reservoir. The old cottage is now in the care of the Mountain Bothy Association, which maintains it as a shelter in the wilderness for walkers and climbers. But don't expect any frills. Bothies are traditionally as basic as you can get. That is their charm, and physical exhaustion makes even the most rudimentary accommodation suddenly appealing. Unfortunately, the tentacles of the coronavirus pandemic have reached even this remote spot. The doors of the Bothy are closed against me, and as dusk falls across the moor, I'm forced to camp. Fighting swarms of ferocious midges, I struggle in the gathering gloom to erect my tent and secure a ticket to dreamland. If only. Listening to rutting stags, I eventually nod off. My route next morning passes Loch Kieran and follows a faint footpath to the remote railway station of Carrower. After experiencing some truly grim Highland weather, I come off the hill and walk alongside the railway line that links Glasgow and Fort William.
At last, the legendary Carrower station. Ooh.
Carrower Station is famous these days for being a location in the cult film Trainspotting. In fact, it's the only time you see a train in the whole movie, which is part of the point, I suppose. Carrower being just about as remote as you can get using public transport. The nearest public road is 10 miles away by hill track. Other than that, you have to take the train to get here.
But what is a railway station doing here in the middle of a desolate moor at over 400 metres above sea level? Well, the answer takes us back to the golden age of the shooting estate. Fabulous wealth, a time when the Victorian super-rich came out to play and to kill things.
In the 19th century, the owner of the nearby Carrower estate had the station built to allow his guests to get off the London train and join him hunting, shooting and fishing. No expense was spared in the pursuit of luxury and pleasure, it seems. From the station, a pony and trap would convey the guests in style down to the shores of Loch Ossian.
And this wee building here is the Loch Ossian Youth Hostel. I've used it a few times myself in the past, and I have to say it's a lot more comfortable than spending a night under canvas or even spending the night in a bothy. But few of the hostelers who use this place realise that it was once a private waiting room for passengers who were about to board a luxurious steamboat that would take them all the way down Loch Ossian to the even more luxurious Carrower Lodge.
In those days, the lodge was a splendid baronial pile with its own steamer pier. Sadly, it burned down in the 1940s. The new lodge that replaces it was finished in 2004 and is built of imported Portuguese granite, steel and glass at a cost said to be in the region of £20 million. I meet David Taylor, who runs the lodge on behalf of its Swedish owners. When they are not resident, the place can be rented by discerning folks with money to get away from it all.
Now, as I understand it, that lodge, that luxurious lodge, isn't just the preserve of the family that own it, but they have it, make it available for rent.
That's correct. Although it's this family's Scottish holiday home, they do like to rent it out on a commercial basis. And for those who can afford it, we probably get about 4 or 5 bookings each year from well-heeled commercial clients, and they do enjoy it. I must say, the clients that come, obviously they're very well-heeled because it's a very expensive property
Yeah, I was
to
going to
rent.
say, how much does it cost?
Well, it would probably cost you a little bit more than £20,000 for a 3 to 4 day stay, but that covers everything.
Right, I should hope so. Bed
It's
and breakfast and dinner.
bed and breakfast and dinner and lunch. And
So you need a mortgage, really, to come for a weekend?
well, yeah, indeed. But do you know, there is wealth out there in the world today, as you're well aware. We certainly have had a very well-known Irish rock star, the lead singer in a famous Irish rock band. Leave that
Right.
to your imagination. A famous Hollywood actress has been, and there's various luminaries will appear throughout the course of a year.
I think I'm going to have to start saving up for a booking. It might take a lifetime.
We might do you a deal.
Now you're talking.
Today's guests at Carrower can still enjoy traditional spotting pursuits. They can bag a stag or improve their marksmanship with clays, which gives me a chance to impress resident stalker Alan MacLeod.
Paul! How could I have missed that?
They were just behind
It was a sitting duck.
Things can only get better, as the song says, but there's a lot of pain to get through first. Alan advises me to keep my eyes open and to swing through, but it doesn't help.
How can I keep missing? I'll try one more.
You want to go for the one going away, yeah?
One going away, I think. Paul! Yes!
Well done.
That's a very low hit rate. It's at 1 in 10.
Thankfully, there are no more cartridges left to shame me further. But as consolation for my dismal failure, David serves up his signature dish of venison Wellington.
This is the famous venison Wellington for you.
Wow, that's a splendid creation, that, isn't it?
As they say, it's a stoter.
Stoter.
It's a
It is
stoter.
indeed. And it's got the stag's head on the top.
Stag's head,
Yeah.
very Carrower. I do think that the ceremonial cut, a bit like the haggis, of course, I think should be done by you. So here's the
for your
knife,
honest,
and if
on
you
your
go
face
straight
kind of
through the
thing.
middle, and you can open it up, and we can hopefully
Right.
see that it's all good
Right,
to
no
go
messing.
inside.
You were ready? And
Perfect.
push it aside.
Well done.
Oh! I mean, what a lunch to have that. Is your mouth watering?
Good.
'Cause mine
It is indeed too. It is
Right.
indeed too. So we better make haste so you can
I'll go to
enjoy
the
this.
dining room.
Well, it's good.
I'll
and
change for dinner. That's heavenly. It really is. David is an excellent chef. And what a place to enjoy my meal. And a magnificent dining room, extraordinary tapestry behind me, and a wonderful view outside.
Replete with the fat of the land, I leave Carrower, following a winding Land Rover track for 18 kilometres to the still waters of lovely Loch Laggan. Loch Laggan is a narrow loch about 11 kilometres long. Like the Blackwater Reservoir, the loch has been harnessed to generate hydroelectric power, in this case from the River Spean. The dam was built back in the 1930s, adding another 5 kilometres to the length of the loch. On the northern shores of Loch Laggan is the Craigmeggy National Nature Reserve. Rory Richardson is the reserve manager, who has a vision of the past he wants to bring alive.
Rory, what's the plan with the land here at Craigmeggy?
Well, it's a matter of bringing this land back to, the woodland back to what it used to be like about 600 years ago, and to bring back the ancient woodland and the habitats. And to do that, we have to reduce the deer numbers down to a healthy rate, which is about 3 to 5 per square kilometre. And almost everything else falls into place.
I imagine you'll have a lot more species here now than you would otherwise.
It's unbelievable now. Each year we're finding new species coming, new butterflies, new moths. All the grouse species like black grouse, the ptarmigan, red grouse, numbers are all great, and with that come the raptors as well. So it's fantastic. A lot more wader birds in the lower ground. So it's really a fantastic success.
It's not just birds and plants that Rory is keen to preserve. His vision takes us back to a post-glacial future when now long-extinct species were commonplace.
Rory, do you know what kind of species would have been here, say 600-700 years ago, before the land was overgrazed?
Oh, absolutely. You'd have had wolves, lynx, even brown bears. But there would have been a lot more. There would have been capercaillie in the pine woodland. There would have been a lot more of all of these species, a lot more birds, a lot more raptors. But no, all these species were here then, and slowly they've been eradicated.
And now you're bringing them back.
Whether
Maybe not the bears.
Maybe not the bears or the wolves. It's a very controversial issue, but slowly but surely the species are coming back, and that may happen in time.
In the middle of Loch Lagan are two small islands. One is now connected to the shore because of falling water levels in the loch. According to local legend, both the islands were used by the ancient kings of Dunkeld when they came to Loch Laganside for hunting and feasting. Boarding a boat, we travel back in time to the first of the islands, Elanaree, the Isle of the Kings.
Do we know who the kings were?
Well, we know that Fergus was the most famous one, and a lot of people call it King Fergus's Island. But there was 7 kings that were buried in a mound just across on the mainland, maybe a little bit west of Ardverigi.
So you're talking about the Dark Ages, really?
The Dark Ages,
A long time
absolutely.
ago.
Yeah, the Caledonian kings, and certainly possibly in the time of the Picts as well.
Leaving the boat, we clamber ashore on Elanaree, where Rory shows me the crumbling ruins of a mysterious-looking structure.
These walls might be some of the oldest walls in the Highlands of Scotland. This would have been the big hall here. And you can see there, just looking out, there was a tower originally as well. It would have been an amazing building at that time.
Mm-hmm. Do we know what it was used for?
You can see the walls are really thick. There was some sort of fortification, so it's for safety, but mainly it was to come here at night after a day's hunting and have a good time.
So it was like a royal holiday home, was it? A wee boat hole in the Highlands.
That's exactly it.
Now, legend has it there's another island called Elanacombe.
Absolutely.
Where is that? Is that the wee island over
So
there?
there you go. That's what they call the Hounds Island.
What was all that about? What's
Well,
the
that's
idea there?
about them leaving their hounds at night. When they were feasting here, they would have put their hounds on there.
I wonder why. Too many dogs begging at table.
Exactly.
You
They
don't
probably
want
didn't
that.
train them. They would have been bigger dogs. They were pretty tough dogs.
Rory conjures up a mythic past with a vivid word picture of ancient times. I can almost hear the dogs baying from their island.
The noise at night would have been just terrific. And the crackling of fire and everything else, it would have been something else.
A truly mythic scene.
The smell of wild boar. Sounds excellent to me.
Streaky bacon.
Fantastic.
Leaving the island and thoughts of kingly feasts, I head to the eastern end of Loch Lagan and the unexpected sight of a huge expanse of sand. Forming a great crescent, it makes the biggest freshwater beach in the whole country. It had its moment of fame and television glory in the early 2000s, when it was a frequent location for the hugely popular series Monarch of the Glen.
The lights, the cameras and the actors have all gone now. And this wonderful beach, as the sun sets in the west, is as glorious as ever, making this an ideal place for me to rest my weary bones and reflect on my grand tour from Kinlochleven to Loch Lagan.
My next grand tour takes me to Giant Country and the lochs of Old Perthshire.